Hello and welcome to part 1 in a series of videos that I'm putting out where I break down all the fights taking place at UFC 238 from a betting perspective. So in today's video I will be going through 3 fights on this card, and throughout this week I'll be covering off the rest of the fights for UFC 238. I will leave a link to those videos in the description below when they're posted, so please check them out. And don't forget, as ever, I will be doing a live stream on fight day if every single one of the videos that I put out for UFC 238 gets 400 likes. That will be around about 10% of the views that these videos will get. So 400 likes, not too much of an ask. So if you want me to do that live stream where I go through all the fights taking place at UFC 238 to try and find a decent value prop bet for all of the fights, and where I also answer all your questions from the live chat about the fights taking place at UFC 238 and anything else you want to ask me, then please hit the like button below. Every single one of these videos needs to get 400 likes if you want that live stream 2 or 3 hours before UFC 238 takes place. But that is it. Let's jump right into the first fight that I want to talk about in today's video, which is going to be Calvin Kattar against Ricardo Lamas. Now, Calvin Kattar is a fighter that I am very, very high on, and you will often hear me talk about my research process behind the fight card where, I'll scan through all the fights taking place on a card, and there will be names that jump out at me as potential bets, and then what I will do, I will go and watch footage of both guys involved in that matchup to kind of make a decision on whether a bet is worthwhile or not. And sometimes my initial instinct will be confirmed, and I'll think that the guy whose name jumped out at me is a good bet, and on other occasions, I'll retreat and not like the bet as much as I thought I would. But Kattar is definitely one of these guys that, after researching the matchup between Kattar and Lamas, I definitely think he is a good bet. I am very high on this guy. I think he's absolutely brilliant, and purely from a biological standpoint, we straight away can see that these are two fighters on opposite trajectories in their career. Calvin Kattar is very experienced with over 20 pro fights. He's been competing since way back in the day in Elite XC, but he's still only 31 years old. He's just reaching his prime. And Kattar, training with some great guys in Boston and New Jersey, he's going to be making big improvements from fight to fight. Whereas on the other hand, Ricardo Lamas isn't really often considered as a veteran. I think people forget how old this guy is, but he's actually 37 years old now. And once a male athlete reaches the age of 33, on average their body will start to produce much lower levels of testosterone, which means their athletic performance will decline every year past the age of 33. And the further they get away from the age of 33, the more chance there is that from fight to fight they will significantly decline. Now, I know, of course, I have to repeat myself because there may be new people watching these videos. Of course, there will be outliers in the sport like Daniel Cormier, who is still able to perform at a high level into his 40s. But generally speaking, the further away from the age of 33 a male athlete gets, the worse they become. So we've got two fighters here on very different career trajectories. Kattar, 31 years old, in his prime, making big improvements from fight to fight and looking great, whereas Ricardo Lamas at 37 years old, you would expect him to start declining. Now, Kattar is just excellent. He's a fighter I'm very high on. He has had a few really solid performances in the UFC, despite his loss against Moicano, who I also consider to be one of the best featherweights in the world. He picked up an impressive win over Shane Burgos, and Kattar is one of those guys that's just pretty damn good everywhere. Doesn't really have any weaknesses. Standing up, he's very technical, he's very sharp, he's very fast, he throws a wide range of strikes. And another thing I like about Kattar is that he's got the cardio to fight at a high pace for 3 rounds, so he can really let his hands go and try to throw a high volume of strikes per round. He doesn't have to worry about pacing himself, doesn't have to worry about holding back. Literally from the first second of the fight, he can really let his hands go and put a pace on his opponent. And another thing I really like about Kattar is that he's able to find his range very early on in a fight. So he does hit the ground running and he starts to let his hands go very early, which means you can count on him winning the first round because it doesn't take him any time to warm up, which is very, very good. If Kattar can keep this fight standing, I really think he's going to dominate, because Ricardo Lamas isn't the best striker. He's just quite scrappy, quite ordinary, quite basic. Obviously, he's primarily a grappler. And when it comes to striking, I do feel these guys are light years apart. I really think, like, Kattar will put on a striking clinic if this fight stays standing. And I know, I'm not trying to compare. Calvin Kattar to the likes of Max Holloway, but or Jose Aldo, but what I will say is Kattar is a very technical striker, and in the fights against Holloway and also Jose Aldo, we have seen Lamas struggle against, really technical strikers in the past. He also got absolutely flatlined by Josh Emmett. So Lamas is primarily a grappler, tends to do quite well against other grapplers, but when he faces, really technical strikers, he can struggle because his striking is very basic. So really, who wins this fight, or who is more likely to win this fight, really comes down to, whether or not Lamas can take Kattar down and keep him down and win this fight on the ground. And while it is kind of difficult to measure Kattar's takedown defense, because he hasn't really fought that many high-level wrestlers throughout his career, what I will say, having gone back and watched a lot of his career fights, even dating back to his days in CES, what I would say is that even though the wrestlers that Kattar has fought haven't been at that high of a level, his takedown defense is very good, and he's very difficult to hold down. Kattar's one of those guys that if you do get him down, he's able to pop right back up to his feet like a spring. And, realistically, I never like to judge fighters on win or loss records, because win or loss records mean nothing. But if a guy has a record of 19-3, and he's had several fights in the UFC, several fights in a decent promotion like CES, he's fought in Elite XC, it's very rare that you'll see fighters who compete on the American regional MMA circuit have a record of 19-3, unless they've got decent wrestling and a decent ground game. Because let's face it, across the entire regional scene in the United States, there are strong wrestlers. There are guys that were strong wrestlers in high school and college competing on the regional scene, and Kattar would not have been able to duck those kind of guys for 21 pro fights. So the fact that 22 pro fights. So the fact that Kattar is 19-3 does suggest that his takedown defense is very good. I've seen flashes of excellent takedown defense in his past fights, and he's also very technical on the ground. I just love the fact that when he does get taken down, he immediately pops back up. And that's quite significant in this fight, because even though Ricardo Lamas is primarily a grappler, he's not the strongest offensive wrestler. And another thing you'll notice about Lamas is when he does get his opponents down, doesn't have the best top control. He normally gives them a lot of space, which means they can pop back up to their feet very quickly. So I do think even if Lamas is able to get takedowns on Kattar, I really think Lamas is going to struggle to hold Kattar down for a long enough period to really have a meaningful impact on the outcome of this fight, because I just don't think he'll be able to get enough top control to really win rounds and trump the great work that I expect Kattar to do standing. Now, Lamas's most dangerous weapon is his submissions. He is a very crafty submission artist. Like I say, not the strongest wrestler. I believe he was an NCAA Division 3 level wrestler, which, sometimes we see NCAA Division 3 level guys come in and do very well. Most of the time, though, an NCAA Division 3 level guy isn't really that impressive in the UFC. And Lamas, like I say, is quite an average grappler, but quite an average wrestler, but his submission game is very, very dangerous, and that's the biggest threat that he poses to Kattar here. I don't really see him being able to take Kattar down and control him on the ground for long periods of time. I don't really see him posing any threat to Kattar when it comes to striking, but there is a definite risk that Lamas could catch Kattar with one of his cheeky submissions. He's a very, very crafty submission artist. I mean, here we can see he picked up a submission win against Charles Oliveira, which is definitely not an easy thing to do. So, if we look at this fight from a betting perspective, after everything that I've just seen, we have currently got Ricardo Lamas at around about, call it an average of 2.30, which is plus 130 for an implied probability of 43%. There is no way that I would bet Ricardo Lamas here. I just think that Kattar is brilliant. I think that they're on opposite career trajectories, and I think Kattar has got the takedown defense and ground game to defend himself on the ground if he gets put on the ground, and keep the majority of this fight standing and win a predominantly stand-up fight. So if we look at the odds on Calvin Kattar, they are currently around about an average of, call it 1.64, which is minus 156 for an implied probability of 61%. And yeah, I think Kattar is a decent bet at these odds, guys. Obviously, you know, do your own research. I'm just a guy that is on the internet talking. You know, I just sit at home in my pants all day researching fights, so don't take my word for it, but definitely do your own research on this one. I personally cap Kattar at having around about a 70% chance of winning this fight. I think, you know, giving Lamas a 30% allocation for the chances of catching Kattar in, you know, a crafty submission, or, you know, catching Kattar on an off day and managing to grind him out with his wrestling, although that's really unlikely. But I think 30% is a fair allocation of risk to the chances of Lamas winning. But I really do think Kattar is going to be able to keep this fight standing and outstrike Lamas and win quite a comfortable decision. So I do think that Kattar deserves more respect than the bookies are giving him. I definitely think there's value. I definitely give him more than a 61% chance of winning, much closer to 70%, which means if you bet Kattar at the current odds, you are getting a nice 9% margin over the betting site. So Kattar is a solid bet for me, but do your own research, and please do not cry like a baby if he loses, because anything can happen in MMA. So now we move on to the next fight that I want to talk about in today's video, which is going to be Bevon Lewis against Darren Stewart. Now this is Bevon Lewis's second fight in the UFC, and to be honest, he looked absolutely great in his debut. I was very impressed with him. He got very, very unlucky. He was cruising against Uriah Hall, was up 2 rounds pretty clear going into the 3rd round. All he had to do was just avoid being finished in the 3rd round, and he would have won an easy decision. Very clearly up 2 rounds, but like I say, he was flash KO'd in that 3rd round by Uriah Hall, and I think this was just a little bit of a lack of experience from Bevon Lewis. You know, it was only his sixth pro fight. You know, he'd never felt a loss before in pro MMA. And he had a very comfortable 1st and 2nd round. He was able to easily outstrike Hall. He was just chipping away at Hall. And then he got a little bit complacent in the 3rd round, walked onto a big counter and got sat down. Now, I don't think this is so much of a big deal. I don't think it will affect Bevon Lewis that much, because this wasn't one of those, you know, devastating KOs that would really have hurt Lewis, or, you know, really have taken him some time to recover from. I don't think this is really going to affect the confidence of Lewis. If anything, I think this will motivate him to do better, because it wasn't one of those, you know, KOs where, you know, Lewis got completely flatlined, got death shotted, his lights weren't shut off. He just walked onto a counter and got sat down, and the referee jumped in and stopped the fight to stop him taking any more damage on the ground, you know, when Hall was coming in to finish him off with ground and pound. Really wasn't a bad KO. I think this was just an example of a young fighter that got a little bit complacent. He dominated the 1st and 2nd round, was cruising, was very comfortable, got lured into a false sense of security by a crafty veteran like Hall, and walked onto a big counter. But he will learn from this. He will definitely learn from this. And I've been quite high on Lewis. He looked great in his UFC debut. One of the things that I really liked about Lewis was that he looked very confident in his debut. You know, for all the criticism that Uriah Hall receives, he is still a scary guy to fight. Still very fast, still very explosive, still hits very hard, still very unpredictable. So no matter who you are, you're going to be a little bit nervous facing someone like Uriah Hall. You're going to be reluctant to let your hands go, because you know that his highlight reel is scary, and at any second he could just uncork a flashy, explosive bomb out of nowhere and put you to sleep. And I guess to some extent that's kind of what happened to Lewis. But the fact that Lewis didn't let that fear, that anxiety affect his performance is a sign that Lewis could develop into something very special, and could grow to be very good, because, like I say, he looked pretty damn good against Hall, and not to show up and put in a nervous performance against such a big name as Hall is quite impressive. Now, when we take a look at this fight and try and work out how it might play out, I do think it's fair to say that Lewis reminds me of Jon Jones in many ways, and there are a few similarities here. I mean, Bevon Lewis trains at the same gym as Jon Jones. Here we can see him with Coach Wink at Jackson Wink MMA. There's a few pictures of Bevon Lewis at Jackson Wink, and he does remind me a lot of Jon Jones just in the way he moves. He's very good everywhere. You know, at 6'3" with a 79-inch reach, he's got a similar frame to Jon Jones. Fights very long, but at the same time, he's also a strong wrestler, strong grappler. Throws a wide range of strikes. He's just very good. Reminds me of Jon Jones a lot. And in terms of skills, in my opinion, there's absolutely no doubt that Darren Stewart is second best everywhere. You know, Bevon Lewis has a massive advantage when it comes to striking. You know, Stewart's striking is quite basic. He's explosive and dangerous, but very, very basic. Lewis is way more technical, throws a much more diverse range of strikes, fights long. Lewis is at a much higher level striking, and when it comes to grappling, Lewis is also light years ahead of Darren Stewart. You know, Darren Stewart has very bad takedown defense, a very low level ground game, and this would be a very easy fight for Bevon Lewis if we could trust him to come into this matchup and use his wrestling to take Darren Stewart down and grind him out. But unfortunately, just like Jon Jones, you know, even though Jon Jones is a very strong wrestler, people have said that he could quite easily have competed at NCAA Division 1 level or Olympic level if he really would have applied himself. Lewis is the same in that he's also a very strong wrestler, but like Jon Jones, he doesn't use it as often as he should, which is very, very frustrating. Because even though, you know, Bevon Lewis is very good everywhere, and I understand he wants to make a name for himself, and he's primarily a striker, so he likes to strike, I would like to see a young up-and-coming prospect like this fight a little bit smarter, and just take the easiest path to victory, which would be his wrestling. You know, this would be a very easy fight for Bevon Lewis if he just came out, took Stewart down and grinded him out on the ground. But I don't think he will, because he never really has done that in the past in his fights in the LFA or on the Contender Series. So I don't see Lewis doing that. This is probably going to be a stand-up fight, despite the fact that Lewis has the skills to win easily with grappling. Now that's very frustrating, because we often find situations where a fighter has a very clear path to victory, but it's unlikely that they're going to take that path. They're gonna do their own thing because they're stubborn or it's not in their comfort zone. Now, if we look at the odds on Bevon Lewis at the moment, he's currently around about an average of 1.44, which is minus 227 for an implied probability of 69%. Now, if I felt confident that Lewis would come into this fight with a grappling heavy game plan, I would absolutely bet him to win. But I don't trust him to do that. I mean, I would like him to do it. It would be smart. You know, he suffered a bad loss in his debut against Uriah Hall. To get a win in the UFC, to get back in the win column, the easiest way to do that would be to use his grappling, but I don't think he's going to do that. So there's no way that I would bet Darren Stewart here. I know his odds are pretty generous at around about 3.0, which is plus 200 for an implied probability of 33%. But he's second best everywhere, guys. He really is. Lewis has the skills to dominate. It's just, at the current odds, I'm finding it difficult to pull the trigger on Lewis. At the moment, he's a reluctant pass for me, because I think he can dominate the fights with his grappling, but I don't think he'll go to his grappling. And my concern with him is, even though his striking is at a much higher level than Stewart's, you know, Stewart is very tough, very gritty. He's one of these guys that you have to practically kill in order to beat, and he will go out on his shield. He will not just allow himself to be grinded out. He will go for the kill. If he's behind in a fight, if he senses he needs a finish in order to win, he will go for the finish. And we haven't really seen Bevon Lewis face that much adversity throughout his career. You know, he's been able to pretty much dominate every single one of his opponents. So he might be one of those guys, you know, it's too early to tell, but he might be very good at being the hammer, but not so good at being the nail. So I don't feel comfortable betting on Lewis as a big favourite, because like I say, at his current odds, to give him to be able to bet Lewis at the current odds, you have to cap him at having a 75 to 80% chance of winning, which I think is a big stretch considering how dangerous Stewart is. You know, he hits very hard, he's explosive, he's very tough. But it's a reluctant pass, because I do think Lewis is better everywhere and he has the skills to dominate. So this is one of those fights where at the current odds I'm going to pass. But having said that, I will keep a close eye, and I may be tempted to pull the trigger on Lewis if his odds improve. So I will definitely be keeping a close eye on these odds, because we have to remember, his odds opened up at around about 1.65, which is minus 154 for an implied probability of 61%. And I personally cap Lewis at around about 70%, which means his odds at the moment are dead accurate. But as we can see here, his odds have declined down from 1.65, so if they move back up, I would definitely bet Lewis at these odds. I'm not sure if we're going to get them, but what I would say is that, we see a lot of casual gamblers bet on these big pay-per-view cards. The UFC are going to be marketing this event heavily. They are the MMA media are going to be pushing this event very hard as well. So, a lot of casual gamblers will be betting this event, and we know that casual gamblers love to chase underdogs because the payoff's better. It's not going to be exciting to bet on Bevon Lewis. It really isn't at big favourite odds. The casual gamblers that make up the majority of the money being wagered on the UFC are more likely to bet Stewart. He's got a few fights in the UFC. He's exciting. They may remember seeing a few highlight reel KOs from him. So casual gamblers may come in, bet Stewart, which would improve the odds on Bevon Lewis for us, possibly. It's all guesswork, but we do tend to see a lot of line movement on big pay-per-views, and we also often see underdogs decline as we get closer to the time of the fights, because like I say, the vast majority of people the vast majority of money that gets bet on these big pay-per-views will come from casual gamblers, and the casual gamblers love to bet underdogs because the payoffs are better, and they let the odds and their greed make their betting decisions for them. So that is it for that fight, guys. We now move on to the final fight that I want to talk about in today's video, which is the co-main event between the lovely Jessica Ai and the equally lovely Valentina Shevchenko. Now, before I get into breaking this fight down from a betting perspective, I do want to make it very clear that I think that Valentina Shevchenko is overrated. I see a lot of people in the MMA community think that Shevchenko is the greatest thing since sliced bread, and I've never been that high on Shevchenko because I do think she's got some massive holes in her game. I think in order for a fighter to justify the kind of praise that Shevchenko gets, I really feel like they need to be excellent in all areas, and I feel like Shevchenko has some huge holes that over time opponents will be able to exploit. The first hole that she has is that on occasions she's quite passive standing, she's quite reactive, doesn't really let her hands go that much, doesn't really do that great of a job of putting a stamp on rounds, which means, there is a potential for her to be outpointed and lose a decision from time to time. And also, when on the ground, she makes a ton of mistakes. She's very green on the ground, puts herself in a lot of bad positions. But having said that, I wanted to cover that off just so that you don't think I'm being ignorant to how this matchup could play out, because what I'm about to say is something that I very rarely say. You know me, I never like to work in black and whites, I never like to work in absolutes. I like to consider all possibilities. So it is very rare you will hear me say this, but I don't really give Jessica Ai any chance of winning. And it is very, 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 very rare that you will hear me say that. I've been making these videos for about 3 months now. I've covered hundreds of fights on this channel, and I don't think I've ever said this before. I think maybe I said it with the Anthony Smith versus John Jones fight, but I really do not give Jessica Ai a chance of winning this fight. And I wanted to make it clear that I do think Shevchenko's overrated, just so that when I made that bold statement, you didn't think I was another one of these Shevchenko hype boys that drinks the MMA media Kool-Aid, and because if you're watching this video, you're probably one of the guys that takes betting on MMA more seriously, so you will also see the same weaknesses in Shevchenko that I see. So if I were to just come straight out and say I don't give Jessica Ai a chance, you may roll your eyes and think I was another one of these Shevchenko fanboys. Just wanted to get that out the way. And I never like to work in absolutes, but I don't give Ai much of a chance here because she has really bad fight IQ. She also struggles to put her stamp on rounds, and she doesn't really have the wrestling to take Valentina down and hold her down. You know, if she does get Valentina down, Valentina's quite strong, should be able to pop her way back up to her feet. And what I will also say about Valentina is that the criticisms that I've just made about her have come based on her performances at bantamweight. What I will say is that since she moved down to flyweight, she has looked a hell of a lot better. She looked absolutely spectacular in her last fight against Joanna Jędrzejczyk. So maybe all my criticisms of her are only true to how she looked at bantamweight, and maybe now at flyweight she will have turned the corner and looked much better. But she looks absolutely excellent at flyweight, much more powerful, much faster, much sharper, much more explosive. But the fact that Jessica Ai has pretty much no chance of winning this fight, because I believe Shevchenko is better everywhere, unfortunately means that this comes at a heavy cost. And as we can see, Shevchenko is a big favourite. Now, when we see odds on Jessica Ai, some people may be tempted just to blind bet her, you know, on the chance that something crazy might happen. And, you know, I get it. If we look at the odds on Jessica Ai, currently around about an average of 9.0 for, which is plus 800 money line odds for an implied probability of 11%. Yep, I get it. You know, it's MMA, anything can happen, but these are not personally the kind of bets that I like to place, because I really do not give Jessica Ai much of a chance of winning at all. And then if we look at the odds on Shevchenko, her odds currently around about 1.08 for a moneyline odds of minus 1,250 for an implied probability of 93%. So in order to bet Shevchenko here and get any value, you have to give her a 98% or better chance of winning, which is just crazy in a sport like MMA where so much can happen. And this brings me on to my next point, guys, because I want you to study this number very carefully. You know, you should be looking at least a 5% margin when you place a bet. You want at least a 5% margin over the betting sites. And here you can see that Shevchenko's implied probability is 93%. So to get that 5% margin, you have to give Shevchenko a 98% chance of winning, which is crazy when you take into consideration the fact that she might have a bad weight cut. She might have some bad sushi the night before and get sick on fight day and feel compelled to take the fight anyway because she doesn't want to pull out, which might affect her performance. She might be on her period, which might affect her performance. She might throw a kick and her toes land on Jessica Ai's knee and she gets a compound fracture and the referee stops the fight. She could get a compound fracture on one of her fingers. Her finger could be basically hanging off and the referee could stop the fight. The fight could be stopped due to a cut if, you know, Ai glances her with a sharp part of her glove or her elbow. There are just so many ways that this fight could go. You know, Shevchenko might get disqualified. There are so many ways that make it impossible to bet Shevchenko at these odds. And I want to make this clear, because when you're on your betting site this weekend and you're placing your bets and you're looking at, you know, placing parlays and accumulators and you're just tossing Shevchenko into everything, just remember this number here, where you are getting absolutely no value for your money. It is a terrible idea to bet Shevchenko in any capacity. Do not bet her straight and do not put her into a parlay or an accumulator, because it is definitely a negative EV bet. Jessica Ai, it is very unlikely Jessica Ai can win this fight on merit, but MMA is a crazy sport and a lot can happen. And to illustrate this point for you, I actually made this little thing here, which I want you to consider when you are looking at putting fighters like Shevchenko into your parlays and accumulators. So as we can see, Shevchenko's odds are currently around about 1.08. And here you can see that we have got a few bets here. So here we've got $100. And here we've got Shevchenko's odds of 1.08. So if we bring up the calculator, you can see... Sorry, my computer's running a little bit slow because I am recording this video. Are we going to get the calculator? Calculator's not going to come up. You got to be kidding me. Oh well, we'll go to the Google calculator instead. Shout out to... Oh, there it is. It's finally loaded. Little bit of lag there for the stream. Sorry, the video. But we're up now. So if we look at this table here, we can see that if we bet $100 on Valentina Shevchenko at odds of 1.08, our return is $108 minus our stake, giving us an overall profit of $8. So if you bet $100 on Shevchenko this weekend, you get about $8 back. Now, that's significant because you would have to win 12 consecutive bets like this just to make an overall profit of $96. And we can do the calculation here. There are 12 consecutive bets. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. If we do 8, profit of 8 for each bet, multiplied by 12, that comes to $96. So you've got to win 12 consecutive bets just to roughly break even, just to roughly make $100. If one of these bets loses, if one of these bets loses and you take a minus $100 loss, you can see that now if we go 11 multiplied by 8, that only comes to 88. So you'd actually be on a $100 minus 88. You'd actually be at a minus $12 profit, which is kind of crazy across 12 bets. You would go 11-1 if you were to place 12 bets at odds like this, 11-1, but you would actually be at a loss. So it's very important to understand this when you are looking at putting fighters like Valentina Shevchenko or Tatiana Suarez into a parlay accumulator for this event, because it is dead money. It is a minus EV bet, and yes, you might get lucky and you might win 100 bets like this consecutively, but more often than not, you'll take an L over the long term if you consistently place these kind of bets. They're just not worth it, because imagine if you suffered 2 losses in this space of time. On paper, you'd be 10-2, 10 wins, 2 losses, which looks like quite a good record. But in actual fact, you would have made $80 in profit minus the $200 on losses. You'd actually be down $120, even though you'd won 10 bets and only lost 2. And obviously then it would take you a very, very long time to recover from that loss. You'd have to go on and win another 10 or 11 of these bets just to break even. So please remember these concepts, guys. I hate to spend so long on a stupid fight like Shevchenko against Jessica Iber. It's a very important point to make. So yes, Shevchenko should dominate, she should win easily, but she could get DQ'd, she could get a compound fracture, which would force the referee to stop the fight, she could break her hand, she could have some bad sushi, she could have a panic attack the day of the fight, she could be on her period, she could have a bad weight cut. There are lots of ways that she could lose. You cannot cap her at 98%. So that is an easy pass, and that is it for the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please subscribe to the channel. It would mean a lot if you would subscribe. I'm trying to grow this channel, so every subscription means the world to me. When I see I get new subscribers, it puts a massive smile on my face. So if you haven't subbed yet, please do that. It would mean a lot to me. And also, if you want me to do the live stream for UFC 238 2 or 3 hours before the fights take place, hit the like button below. And if every video that I put out for UFC 238 gets 400 likes, I will do that live stream. And in the live stream, I'll be trying to find a decent value prop bet for all of these fights. And if you don't know what a prop bet is, it is basically just a highly specific bet. For example, Gustafsson to win by knockout or TKO would be considered a prop bet. So I'll be going through all the fights taking place at UFC 238 in that live stream to find the prop bets, and I'll also take as long as I need to take to answer all your questions in the live stream chat. But thank you for watching this video, guys. I'll be back very, very soon with part 2. Leave a comment below to let me know what fights you'd like to see me cover in part 2, and take care. I will see you very soon.
Too many thoughts on my mind, I can't sleep at night, so I just keep writing. I don't need no help, I don't need opinions, so don't waste my time then. I just been living online, my city don't show me no love, and that's fine. Fuck local radio stations, I got more plays than all of these rappers combined. I'm going again, I've been going in, I'm fed up with so many things, I gotta just let it all out. I'm talking about the shit they've been talking about.